Welcome to Derm Drop, your TLDR in dermatology. I'm David Sider, your host, bringing you quick picks from the dermatology literature and other sources in the dermatology community that are interesting and impactful. Episode 8 starts with a heads up that your favorite dermatology biologic could be causing photosensitivity. Chinese researchers combed the FDA Adverse Event Reporting System database looking for drug-induced photosensitivity reported between 2004 and 2023. They found over 20,000 cases. So what were the top three drug categories? Number one was immunosuppressants, which comprised over 10% of all DIP cases. Next came in monoclonal antibodies, which were 9.6% of all drug-induced photosensitivity cases. And third were anti-neoplastic agents, which comprised 5.21%. Pirfenidone, marketed under the brand name Pyrespa for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, was the number one single offender and accounted for 4.43% of the cases alone. Especially pertinent and perhaps surprising to dermatology clinicians were adalimumab, marketed under the brand name Humira, and secukinumab, aka Cosentyx, which were newly identified drugs with signals for photosensitivity. Adapalene made the newly identified list too, though the only surprising thing about that is that it wasn't identified in 1996 when it was first FDA approved. Some obvious limitations here are that the analysis may be skewed by lack of clinical recognition of photosensitivity reactions, prescribing trends, and reporting bias towards novel drugs. Nonetheless, consider educating your new biologic and immunosuppressant starts of the possibility of photosensitivity, and don't forget to scan the med list when patients present with photodistributed eruptions. For the complete list of the most frequently photosensitizing medications, check out the 24 May 2025 issue of Nature. Next up, we have phenotype switching. Can AD turn into psoriasis or vice versa? Yes, absolutely. But how? Researchers, who were mostly Canadian with an Italian, a Brit, and an American uber derm, my favorite, Christopher Bunick, performed a disproportionality analysis of pharmacovigilance data from the FDA Adverse Events Reporting System to glean insights into the mechanism underpinnings of this phenomenon. Their findings suggest that the two conditions exist on a spectrum, with Th2 inflammation, think IL-4, IL-5, IL-13, and IL-31 on the atopic dermatitis end of the seesaw, Th17 inflammation, which produces IL-17 and IL-23 cytokines on the psoriasis end, and Th22, which produces IL-22 in the middle. Th1 tends to hang out on the psoriasis end, but just might end up running around and jumping on the AD end just to keep things exciting. When one end of the seesaw is downregulated too far, the other end pops up, causing a phenotype switch. That's what's happening when AD arises after starting a TNF alpha, IL-17, or IL-23 inhibitor, and when psoriasis develops after starting an IL-4 and/or 13 inhibitor. When IL-22 dominates, bulking up the fulcrum and causing both ends of the seesaw to rise, the patient may have both psoriasis and atopic dermatitis, or the intermediary phenotype psoriasiform dermatitis, which tends to have the clinical characteristics of psoriasis, but is histologically similar to atopic dermatitis. That may be what's going on when dupilumab patients develop secondary head and neck dermatitis. But phenotypic switching can also happen without an exogenous trigger. AD-related barrier dysfunction can lead to more frequent self-stranded DNA recognition and thus to the development of psoriasis. And the systemic inflammation underlying psoriasis can trigger dysfunctional maturation of keratinocytes, leading to AD in predisposed individuals. So, extrinsic and intrinsic mechanisms may cause atopic dermatitis to arise in psoriasis, psoriasis to arise in atopic dermatitis, or the confounding hybrid psoriasiform dermatitis to develop. The take-home point: don't get stuck in your original diagnosis if the presentation is changing or your patient is not responding. Next up, we have a quick pick from the Strange Derm files and the shocking revelation that hair follicles can quote unquote taste, and when they're given sweets, they get lazy and stop growing hair. I'm serious. It turns out follicles express a bitter taste receptor called TAS2R4, if you must know, with non-gustatory chemosensory functions, including growth regulation, matrix keratinocyte proliferation, growth factor production, and gene expression. When the taste receptor is stimulated with the stevia sugar alcohol extract, rebaudioside A, or Reb-A for short, the cells that produce the hair shaft become less active and divide less. That's followed by enhanced intrafollicular production of transforming growth factor, or TGF beta 2, which leads to premature catagen, in which hair growth slows before entering the resting telogen phase. Discovery of this pathway may lead to the development of new drug-free products that inhibit unwanted hair growth without the irritation of Nair or eflornithine, formerly known as Vanica. Perhaps a stevia sugar scrub? P.S. Bitter taste receptors can be found on keratinocytes too, so stay tuned for sweet new ways to control aberrant cell growth and other cutaneous processes. For more details about this fascinating research, check out the article below, published 18 March 2025 in the British Journal of Dermatology. And finally, a hot topic in dermatology right now: CSU, or chronic spontaneous urticaria. If dermatology clinicians are going to start treating urticaria again, with the recent approval of dupilumab for CSU and Bruton's tyrosine kinase, or BTK inhibitors, like Novartis's remibrutinib coming on strong in the pipeline, we'd better understand it, because hives are not all created equal. First, chronic spontaneous urticaria, which is the most common form of chronic urticaria, which affects 1% of the population, does not include the inducible urticarias. Chronic inducible urticarias, such as cholinergic, aquagenic, cold, vibratory, and dermatographic varieties, have an identifiable cause. CSU does not include the classic ingestant, inhalant, and infection-caused urticarias either, as they are typically acute, and we're talking about hives lasting 6 weeks or more. In other words, CSU is relentless and it's unpredictable. And it has 4 phenotypes: type 1, or autoallergic; type 2B, or autoimmune; both type 1 and type 2B, and neither. You already know that mast cell degranulation drives urticaria, so how do these CSU variants differ, and why is it important? Type 1, or autoallergic endotype, is marked by IgE, which targets self-antigens. This is often accompanied by allergies and atopy. It's more common, it has a younger onset, and omalizumab or Xolair works great because it blocks IgE. It starts in a week, peaks in a month. Dupilumab works too, but more slowly because it reduces B cell class switching to IgE, so existing IgE still has to dissipate. It starts in a month, peaks in about 6. Type 2, the autoimmune endotype, on the other hand, is marked by IgG, which targets IgE, or the high affinity IgE receptor, Fc epsilon receptor 1. This type is often accompanied by autoimmune disease, think Hashimoto's or vitiligo. It's less common, it's mostly female, and dupilumab or Dupixent works great, but we don't really know why. There are IL-4 receptors on mast cells, and type 2 inflammation is present in wheals, but it may have more to do with downregulating the expression of the Fc epsilon receptor 1 on mast cells or reducing various pro-inflammatory factors contributing to mast cell reactivity, or likely a little of all of the above. So that's all well and good, but when it comes to treatment, you may need an algorithm. Dupilumab, at least in dermatology, will likely be your go-to. You know it, you love it, you keep your patients in-house, and everybody's patient as it kicks in, and everybody's comfy knowing how safe it is. Omalizumab, those are for your patients who may be a partial responder and they fit the type 1 profile. So you refer them to an infusion center and go straight to the higher 300 milligram dose. Remibrutinib, when it comes out, would be for the patient that would rather have petechiae, as that's its cardinal side effect, than a shot, or is too miserable to give it time. So you go BTK since it will work in a day or two, like JAKs, except they interrupt B cell receptor signaling to reduce mast cell activation and antibody production. Like all things immune related and some people's Facebook relationship status, it's complicated. And we're just scratching the surface, pun intended, as anti-KIT antibodies, for example, Barzovolumab, JAK inhibitors, and MRGPRX2 inhibitors are also being studied in urticaria. For now, just remember that none of your current therapeutic options work perfectly every time, so don't overgeneralize your first experience. And by the way, you derm heroes out there like Dr. Jason Hawks who have never stopped treating CSU, we see you. And that wraps up episode 8 of Derm Drop. Thanks for tuning in, and if you like what you hear, hit the thumbs up button, share it with a colleague, and click on over to our LinkedIn page where you can find the links to all of the articles discussed here. Until next time, thanks again.